Good afternoon, Glenn.
Hey David, how you doing?
Well, I'm inferring from your Twitter feed that you're the one person in North America, Western Hemisphere, maybe the planet outside the Middle East, who's not overjoyed by the news of the successful killing of Osama bin Laden.
I would contest that premise in a couple ways. One is I don't know that I'm not overjoyed. I don't think we know what happened, and until we know what happened in terms of the actual facts, I think it's difficult to assess what one's reaction ought to be. The other thing I'd point out is there's a huge amount of public opinion in other parts of the world outside of the Middle East, including in Europe. In Germany, for example, there's a poll saying 60% of the public opposes the killing, thinks that he should have been arrested. Angela Merkel had a huge controversy because she said she's thrilled that he died, and even members of her own party said that that's an inhumane and inappropriate a sentiment for our leader to express. So I'd be very careful about the mythology that what is mandated orthodoxy in the United States is mandated orthodoxy around the world.
Let me rewind, because you said you don't know how you feel. So but uncertainty is not the same as joy. So if you are uncertain, you are not overjoyed.
No, I think there's a distinction between how one feels about the fact that Osama bin Laden no longer exists on the earth, and how one feels about what the United States did to cause that to happen. I think that Osama bin Laden is responsible for the 9/11 attacks. I think the 9/11 attacks are one of the most heinous and wanton acts of slaughter of civilians in the past decade, an act of unmitigated evil, and that whoever is responsible for it, and I think Osama bin Laden is not somebody who I'm going to miss. But that's a much different question than what your view is of what the United States did to kill him.
I understand that, but I just want to go through the immediate. That we are not just creatures of logic. We start, our reasons are connected to our entire being. So I'm just curious to know, when you heard this news, you didn't have that thrill of joy, of relief, of feeling that something good had happened, that right had been vindicated, that innocence had justice brought to their killer?
No, it would be like if you said to me today, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was killed today. I think Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the mastermind, the operational mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. But before I could tell you whether I was happy about that event, I would want to know, did he die because he got a hold of a gun and tried to kill Guantanamo guards and was shot in self-defense? Or did the United States order that he be executed while blindfolded and gagged and tied up and shot in the head and had his corpse dumped into the ocean? If it were the former, I would say, well, then that's probably a good thing. If it were the latter, I would say that's not a good thing. So how it happens is, to me at least, inextricably linked to what one's emotional reaction to the outcome is. I think the outcomes matter, but I think how you get to the outcome matters a lot as well.
You don't worry that maybe you're missing a little piece of connection to the country, to other people, that you can't, that has meant so much to others seems to leave you so cold?
Well, I mean, I think, again, you're suggesting that I have some kind of aberrational reaction and I'm standing alone. I don't think that's the case at all. I think I could point to, 1,000 things that have been written and said by people with platforms and by ordinary people around the world that is very similar to the things that I'm saying as well. So, I think it's a form of emotional blackmail to say, this is an evil person, so I demand that you say that you're thrilled that he's gone no matter how it happened.
I'm not demanding anything.
It reminds me of the torture debates, well, how can you possibly object to what's being done to these people? These are horrible people. You shouldn't care what's happening to them. These are evil terrorists. But I cared what was happening to them because I cared what the United States does and the standards to which we adhere, and I care in this case as well.
Well, I'm certainly not trying to blackmail you, and you have obviously a strong internal core. You're not going to be blackmailed, but I'm trying to get something. Because I was reading your Twitter feed today, and I couldn't quite get a handle on how you were feeling about all this. And I think it's interesting and maybe a good jumping off off point. And what you just said then maybe opens another door that I'm curious about. You know the old jibe of Macaulay's that the Puritans were annoyed at bear baiting not because it gave pain to the bear, but because it gave pleasure to the spectators.
Right.
Now, I wonder here that it's what I can understand the mind of the liberal legalist who says legal process to me is the most important thing in the world, and I care about that intensely. But it's not because I'm so worried about the bear. But I want to just clarify here that that Osama bin Laden deserved to die. You agree? You don't disagree with that, and that on that threshold point we can begin. That this was one of history's monsters, a killer of your fellow citizens. He deserved to die.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's questions. There's questions about whether the death penalty is an appropriate sentence, things of that nature. But I don't have any qualms about the fact that Osama bin Laden is dead, if that's what you're asking.
So where did the
I don't harbor any sympathy for Osama bin Laden. I don't regret the fact that he no longer is alive. So
where's the
that's
qualm?
what you're asking, though. That's my answer.
Where's the qualm?
Well, the qualm is, I'll tell you what the qualm is. If you look, for example, at what the Nuremberg trials were about and what the leading American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial, Robert Jackson, said, obviously the Allied powers who had captured and apprehended the Nazi war criminals who committed the most heinous crimes, not of the last decade, but of the last, multiple centuries in human history. Obviously, the Allies could have just taken them out back and shot them in the head, and nobody would have cared. And Robert Jackson talked about the reason they didn't do that, and that it was so important that they didn't do that, is because the conduct that the Allies were engaged in were going to determine their national character, who they were, what principles they were defending, and so that it was vital not to just shoot the Nazis in the head, but to put them on trial in accordance with Western precepts of justice, show the world the evidence against them, give them the opportunity to defend themselves, and then through a rational standard process of justice, convict them and impose punishment. The Israelis said the same things about Adolf Eichmann. So I think those things are crucial. That's not just a matter of being overly legalistic or liberal or whatever. That's the core of Western justice as we've defined it since at least the end of World War II.
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily liberal, but it is certainly legalistic, and it's not something that it's something that you do or you can do when you have a completely crushed and defeated enemy. And where the enemy society is smashed to pieces, as German society was, and where one might almost say, a little cynically, that one of the purposes of Nuremberg, I have always thought, was to concentrate the guilt of Germany on a very finite number of people. That is, by trying the Nuremberg defendants, you implicitly gave a kind of pass to everybody who was not on trial, and that was tens of millions of people who had a lot more implication in those crimes than anybody in 1945 on our side wanted to acknowledge. But in the case of bin Laden and bin Ladenism, his cause, it looks pretty sick. I think it's certainly on the way out, but it's not destroyed and defeated. And that need to give an excuse to large numbers of people isn't there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, that's a pretty cynical view to take of Nuremberg. I mean, for a long time, Nuremberg sort of been viewed as the peak of Western justice. I mean, we refer to Nuremberg principles all the time. What we said at the time was that this was going to set standards that would bind not just losing parties in war, but especially victors, that it was particularly important that we applied it to ourselves in victory at the time and in future generations, and how just World War II ended up being, said the Nuremberg prosecutors, would be determined by how much we adhered to its standards. And, I think the idea that Osama bin Laden is some sort of active terrorist mastermind at this point, is dubious in the extreme. I don't think he's been very significant over the past, 5 or 6 years. He's barely ever talked about terrorist plots that we've broken up, not been linked to him at all. They've been, linked to Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula and other places. So I do think he's tantamount to the Nazi war criminals who were apprehended, much closer to the Nazi crimes than, the 9/11 attacks, which are now 10 years ago. And I do think it was preferable, if it was possible, and we don't know if it is, to have put him on trial and punished him after due process. But let me ask you this: there, we don't know what happened. So we've heard everything from, he died in a firefight while resisting, to no, he was unarmed, but he was using his life as a human shield. Well, no, that's not true. Most of the people in the house barely got off of a shot, and there's even a report from his 12-year-old daughter through Pakistani officials, which we don't know is true at all, but it could be, that he was actually killed after he was captured. And there's some support for that in what President Obama said in the formulation he used, which is he announced the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden. If that were the case, if we actually captured him, if we had him in custody, if he were a helpless detainee, and then we simply put 2 bullets into his head and dumped his body into the ocean, would that change the calculus for you at all?
First, on that last story, I am going to take with a lot of salt anything that's said by the Pakistani government or anybody connected to it, because their PR problem here is obvious, and their PR imperatives, I think, are pretty clear. So let me set that story to one side.
But I hope, just quickly, I hope you're also taking with a grain of salt what the American government is saying, both because of its history in general and in this particular case of not having the story straight. That doesn't mean we don't know what happened.
It seems
right?
Firefights are pretty confused things, and yeah, there have been some confusion. And I think in the course of time we will have a very clear narrative of what happened, and there must be a lot of video footage that was from the cameras on the top of the soldiers' heads that I assume they were carrying. Hillary Clinton was watching something in that shot that had her hand to her mouth. But I think it was right to kill him. I think that got closure. I would have regarded a capture as being a pretty poor outcome. I think the president was exactly right about that. Capture would mean months and months and years of jail and legal process, and where should he be tried and how, and reviving the whole debate about trial in Lower Manhattan. This is a military enemy of the United States. Congress passed a resolution declaring war on him. You capture him in the sphere of battle, and whatever happened in the 1.5 or 3 3/4 seconds before he died, I'm not going to worry about it too much. I think this was handled exactly correctly by all accounts.
And that doesn't change if, and I know I'm asking hypothetically because, again, we don't know what happened. I'm just trying to test your view. A lot of people have the view, look, I don't care at all how Osama bin Laden died. I'm just happy that he's dead, and however he died, I'm thrilled. So I'm just trying to get a view in that camp. If, for example, and again, we don't know, but I'm just asking hypothetically, and there is a report suggesting it, that I agree should be taken with a grain of salt. But if we had captured him, he's in handcuffs, he's sitting down on the ground with his hands behind his back and his legs bound, totally helpless, everything is secure, and then we put bullets into his head, would you be totally fine with that as well? That wouldn't change the calculus for you?
That might trouble me a little bit, but I would find that such a far-fetched hypothetical, because we are dealing with people, with warriors, with codes. The best of America's best, and that it is incredible to me. It is so beyond incredible to me that is what happened. And the fact that the Pakistani government tells me that that's what happened, those are the same guys who told me they had no idea where bin Laden was. I put very little stock, if any, in what they have to say.
But then at the very least, once you say that, then your assessment of the rightness and propriety of what happened is dependent upon knowing the facts, right? I mean,
let me put it this way. My assessment of the perfect satisfaction of what happened may vary. I mean, obviously, the preferred outcome is to have the American soldier lock eyes with. I mean, I would also be disappointed if you told me that there wasn't a moment's pause in which the American soldier locked eyes with bin Laden, and bin Laden knew that his death was there. I would have been. I mean, if the United States had bombed the compound from the air and killed him in his sleep, that would be the end of bin Laden. I would find that disappointing too. So there are a lot of ways to make it more perfect. We're not writing screenplays here. That we are just dealing with the fact that in this what looks like a flawlessly executed operation, America's most desperate and heinous contemporary enemy has been dispatched without an arduous legal process, knowing that he had been caught. That to me is very important, and I don't see anything here to celebrate. And the Nuremberg model.
Let me ask you this.
I want to say one more thing about Nuremberg.
Go ahead.
Because I think if that is like the foundational text in your worldview, I think your worldview may need more history and less law in it. Because, in fact, to do justice in Germany, we would have had to have killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Nuremberg, and we said I'm too cynical. I'm totally cynical about Nuremberg. It was a whole series of fictions, starting with the fact that there was a Soviet judge, or a bunch of Soviet judges on the panels. But there were murderers who collected pensions from the German state until the day of their death.